A woman steps out of a black car on a quiet street in the 16th arrondissement. She's wearing a coat with no visible label, carrying a handbag no one in the shot can immediately identify, and shoes that look plain until you notice the stitching is entirely hand-done. Nothing she is wearing has a logo larger than a fingernail. And yet everyone on that street who understands old money would clock her as wealthy within 3 seconds, not because of what she's wearing, but because of what she isn't. Here's the paradox nobody in luxury marketing wants to say out loud. The more visible a logo is, the more likely the brand is being avoided by the people who could actually afford anything. There is a specific, well-documented list of brands and product categories that multi-generational wealth, family offices, third and fourth generation heirs, the kind of families whose names are on hospital wings but not on Instagram, systematically steer away from. Not because they can't afford them, because visible luxury branding has become, in old money's internal logic, a tell of new money, a tell of insecurity, a tell that you need the logo to do the talking your bank account should be doing. This isn't snobbery for its own sake, and it isn't some vague, quiet luxury TikTok trend. It's a set of mechanisms, licensing economics, brand dilution math, the sociology of visible signaling, that explain exactly why certain famous, expensive, genuinely well-made brands get quietly crossed off old money's list. We're going to walk through each one, the specific reasoning behind it, and what old money buys instead. This isn't hidden. It's just never taught. Let's get into it. The logo paradox. Why visibility is a liability, not a flex. To understand why old money avoids certain brands, you first have to understand a rule that governs almost every purchasing decision in generational wealth circles. Conspicuous branding is read as a proxy for insecurity about status, not confirmation of it. This sounds counterintuitive in a culture where luxury marketing is built entirely around visible logos. But it's grounded in a fairly simple piece of economic sociology, Thorstein Veblen's century-old concept of conspicuous consumption. The idea that people signal wealth through visible waste still gets cited constantly. But it was written in 1899, describing a world where the nouveau riche industrial class was still working out how to broadcast new fortunes. Old money families, particularly those several generations deep, have spent decades, sometimes centuries, developing a completely different signaling system. One where the goal is to be recognized only by other people who already know what they're looking at. A giant interlocking letter monogram splashed across a canvas tote is legible to literally everyone, including someone who has never set foot in a boutique. That's the entire commercial point of it. Mass recognizability drives resale value and aspirational purchasing. But mass recognizability is precisely what old money is trying to avoid, because it puts the wearer in the same visual category as anyone who saved up for one signature piece. The logo does the flexing, and needing the logo to flex for you is in old money's internal culture, the tell. This is why you'll consistently hear old money style described by stylists, by family office concierge services, by heritage tailors in terms of the phrase hand, pattern, not brand name. The question isn't what label is this, it's who made this, and could I get another one made exactly like it if this one wore out? That second question is the real signal. Anyone can buy a logo. Almost no one can walk into an atelier in Milan or a bespoke house on Savile Row and get a garment or a bag built to their own specifications, with their initials sewn somewhere no one else will ever see them. There's a second layer to this that's less philosophical and more practical. Overexposure risk. A family with real multi-generational capital typically holds assets, real estate, art, jewelry, watches, across decades, sometimes across generations, before they're ever sold or worn publicly. A visible logo on a garment or bag creates a dated signature. Anyone who has seen enough resale listings knows you can date a Louis Vuitton monogram bag or a Gucci Logomania belt to within a 2 or 3 year window just from the hardware and print run. That kind of dateability is fine for a fashion purchase. It's a liability for something meant to be worn for 30 years and then handed to a daughter. If you've ever noticed that the wealthiest person in the room is usually the one wearing the least recognizable outfit, that's not an accident, and we're about to show you exactly why. Hit subscribe if you want the mechanism behind every one of these signals broken down, and drop a comment. Which brand do you think old money quietly avoids the most? We'll be reading these. The diffusion line problem. The single most common reason a historically prestigious brand falls off old money's list has nothing to do with taste. It's a licensing and distribution decision made by the parent company, usually decades ago, that permanently changed who could access the name. Here's the mechanism. Starting in the 1970s and accelerating through the 1990s and 2000s, a wave of European luxury houses discovered that their name alone, independent of the actual craftsmanship, had enormous licensing value. Rather than manufacturing everything in-house at the same quality tier, houses began licensing their names to third-party manufacturers to produce diffusion lines. Lower-priced perfumes, sunglasses, handbags, and ready-to-wear collections designed to be sold at a fraction of the flagship price point, often through department stores and, eventually, outlet malls. This is not a conspiracy theory or an insider secret. It's publicly documented corporate strategy, discussed openly in fashion business journalism, and in the annual reports of the luxury conglomerates themselves. The economic logic was sound. A $1,200 handbag has a small addressable market. A $300 sunglasses line under the same name has a mass one. Volume made up for margin, but volume did something else too. It flooded the market with entry-level product bearing a name that used to signal genuine scarcity. Once a brand's logo is visible on a department store, perfume counter, an airport duty-free display, and an outlet mall storefront simultaneously, the brand has, in old money's internal calculus, been democratized out of exclusivity. It doesn't matter that the flagship atelier is still producing extraordinary work at the top of the house. The signal value of the name has been diluted because anyone can now own a piece of it for a fraction of the price. This is the exact mechanism behind why certain brands with genuinely excellent craftsmanship heritage still get quietly avoided by old money buyers today, while other houses that never pursued mass diffusion, or that pursued it much later and much more cautiously, retain their old money credibility. It's not about quality, it's about access architecture. A house that makes it easy for a middle-income buyer to own a branded item, even an entry-level one, has traded long-term exclusivity for short-term revenue. Old money notices, and old money's internal social currency runs on scarcity, not revenue. There's a specific term family office-style consultants use for this: logo laundering, the process by which an entry-level licensed product, a perfume, a phone case, a keychain, puts a house's name into so many hands that the name itself stops functioning as a scarcity signal, regardless of what the flagship product line still costs. Once a name has been laundered this way, it's extremely difficult to reverse, because the damage isn't to the product, it's to the perception of who else owns something with that name on it. We covered a very specific version of this exact mechanism in our episode on why old money avoids Rolex. The logic there is almost identical, just applied to watches instead of handbags. If you haven't watched that one, it's linked in the description, and it'll make this entire video click into place even more. Go check it out after this. See celebrity collaborations and hype culture. If diffusion lines are the slow-motion version of brand dilution, celebrity collaborations and hype drops are the fast version, and they are almost universally avoided by old money buyers. For reasons that are entirely about timing and association rather than aesthetics. The luxury industry's embrace of streetwear collaborations, designer houses partnering with skateboard brands, sneaker culture labels, or individual musicians for limited drop releases sold through hype-driven scarcity marketing, has been one of the defining commercial strategies of the past 15 years. It has been enormously profitable. It has also, according to old money's internal logic, permanently associated certain product lines with a completely different kind of status signaling, one built on speed and access to hype rather than patience and inherited relationships. This distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. Old money status is built on duration, how long a family has held land, how long a piece of jewelry has been in a family, how long a tailor has been dressing 3 generations of the same men. Hype culture status is built on velocity. Who got the drop first? Who camped outside the store? Who resold it within the hour for triple the price? These are not just different aesthetics, they're different value systems, and old money treats them as close to mutually exclusive. The logo that has appeared on a resale sneaker marketplace, camped out drop line, or celebrity Instagram unboxing video carries what stylists working with legacy families describe as resale residue, an association with speculation and flipping that reads as fundamentally different from inheritance. It doesn't matter if the actual item is extraordinarily well made, the context it was acquired in, a queue, a raffle, a resale markup, signals that the owner was chasing access rather than already possessing it. There's also a reputational contagion risk that family offices actively manage for. When a heritage house partners with a celebrity or public figure for a collaboration, the brand's public image becomes temporarily entangled with that individual's public behavior, controversies, and eventual fall from relevance. A handbag or jacket tied to a specific, dated celebrity collaboration ages the way a photograph does, instantly recognizable as belonging to a particular cultural moment, which is precisely the opposite of the timeless, undateable quality old money purchasing prioritizes. This is why you will almost never see a genuinely old money family member wearing a limited edition collaboration piece, even one that costs significantly more than a standard house item. The price isn't the issue. The dateability and hype association is. This channel exists to map out the actual mechanics behind old money, not aesthetics, mechanisms. If that's useful to you, tap the like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are tired of surface-level quiet luxury. Content. Stick around, because Section 4 gets into the specific brands by name, and some of them might surprise you. The loud logo era. What old money watched happen in real time. To really understand this dynamic, it helps to look at a specific historical case study that old money families in Europe and the Northeast United States watched unfold over a couple of decades, and which functions almost as an internal cautionary tale about brand overexposure. Through the 1980s and into the early 2000s, several major Italian and French houses went through what fashion historians now generally refer to as a logomania period, an era of maximalist, highly visible branding where monograms, interlocking letters, and house crests were deliberately enlarged and multiplied across product lines. This was, again, a documented and often financially successful strategy. It was frequently credited with rescuing certain houses from financial distress by dramatically expanding their customer base beyond the traditional, narrow, old money clientele. And that's exactly the problem, from old money's perspective. The strategy worked by design. It expanded access. A house doesn't go from a narrow client base to a mass one without loosening exactly the kind of exclusivity old money purchasing depends on. Fashion journalists and business analysts have written extensively about how certain houses that leaned hardest into logomania saw a corresponding shift in who their core customer became: younger, more aspirational, more driven by visible status signaling rather than quiet inherited wealth. That's not a criticism of those customers. It's simply a documented market repositioning that changed how old money buyers perceived the brand's exclusivity from the inside. Old money families who lived through this shift in real time, and many multi-generational families in Europe specifically remember it, describe a fairly consistent pattern. The family jeweler, the family tailor, or the trusted personal shopper at a department store would quietly note, sometime in the late 1990s or early 2000s, that a particular house had become too available now, and clients would migrate toward the house's most understated pieces, or away from the brand entirely toward smaller ateliers that had never pursued the same mass expansion. It's worth being precise here. This is not a claim that any specific living designer, executive, or celebrity acted in bad faith. And it's not a claim about any currently living private individual's personal choices. It's a well-documented pattern in luxury retail history about brand strategy and market positioning and how old money purchasing habits responded to it as a matter of public record in business and fashion journalism. The lesson old money took from watching this happen is the one that still governs its purchasing decisions today. A house's exclusivity is not a fixed asset. It's a decision the house makes over and over about how widely to distribute its name. And once that decision tips toward mass accessibility, it is very difficult, sometimes impossible, to walk back. We're building a genuinely deep archive on this channel about the actual financial and social architecture behind generational wealth, not the aesthetic version, the real mechanisms. If you want to go deeper on how families quietly signal status without logos at all, we've got a full episode on the stealth wealth audit linked above. Let us know in the comments which houses you've noticed old money migrating away from. We read every one. The publicly traded problem. There's a structural reason this dynamic keeps repeating across the luxury industry, and it comes down to something that has nothing to do with taste at all. Corporate ownership structure. Most of the world's largest luxury houses are now owned by one of two publicly traded conglomerates. Vast portfolios that include dozens of individual heritage brands under a single corporate umbrella. This is public information, disclosed in annual shareholder reports and covered extensively by financial press, and it creates an inherent structural tension between two goals that used to be aligned and no longer are: exclusivity, which old money customers value, and growth, which public shareholders require. A privately held, family-run atelier can decide to produce 300 pieces a year and turn away demand it can't fulfill, because there are no quarterly earnings calls demanding revenue growth. A publicly traded luxury conglomerate, by contrast, answers to shareholders who expect the flagship houses in its portfolio to grow revenue year over year, which mechanically requires expanding distribution, opening more retail locations, launching more accessible product tiers, and pursuing exactly the kind of mass-market collaborations and diffusion strategies that erode old money exclusivity. This is publicly discussed within the luxury industry itself as the tension between heritage and growth, and it's a major reason old money purchasing has, over the past 2 decades, increasingly migrated toward brands and ateliers that remain independently or family-owned, specifically because those houses are structurally insulated from shareholder pressure to expand distribution. A family office advising a multi-generational client will often specifically flag whether a house is publicly traded or family-owned as part of assessing whether a brand is likely to remain exclusive over a 10 or 20-year horizon. The kind of horizon that matters when you're buying something meant to be worn, not flipped. This is also why old money families often develop long-term relationships with smaller, lesser-known ateliers rather than the largest global names, not out of ignorance of the big houses, but because a small, independently owned workshop has no shareholder-driven incentive to ever become widely accessible. Its scarcity is structural, not marketed. The quiet luxury irony. Here's where the story gets genuinely fascinating, and it's a wrinkle almost no one talks about. The quiet luxury trend itself has, in the last few years, started to eat itself. Around the early 2020s, a handful of unbranded, logo-free heritage brands, largely built around minimalist cashmere, understated tailoring, and virtually no visible branding, became widely publicized in mainstream fashion press and, notably, television, as the literal embodiment of old money style. The commercial effect was immediate and, from old money's perspective, somewhat self-defeating. Brands that had spent decades cultivating a client base, specifically because they were under the radar, suddenly found themselves name-dropped in mainstream articles, discussed extensively on social media-style commentary accounts, and purchased by an entirely new, much younger, much more visibility-driven customer base, chasing the aesthetic, rather than possessing the underlying wealth. This produced what stylists and trend forecasters have started calling, somewhat wryly, the quiet luxury paradox. Once an unbranded aesthetic becomes famous for being unbranded, the absence of a logo starts functioning as a status signal in exactly the same way a visible logo used to, just legible to a slightly more informed audience. A cream cashmere sweater with no visible branding, once genuinely obscure, becomes recognizable specifically because so many articles have described exactly what it is and where it's from. Old money's response to this, consistent with everything we've covered, has been to quietly move even further upstream, toward fully bespoke commissions, family jewelers with no public storefront at all, and ateliers that don't sell through any retail channel a journalist could ever photograph or name drop. The goal was never no logo. The goal was always unlegible to anyone who hasn't already been let in. And the moment an unbranded aesthetic becomes legible to millions of people through a television show or a viral article, it stops serving that function, regardless of how expensive or well-made it still is. This is worth flagging clearly for accuracy. The specific claim that any particular unbranded brand is over or finished as an old money signifier is genuinely contested and evolves quickly. It's an ongoing, actively shifting dynamic rather than a settled fact, and should be treated as such rather than as a fixed rule. This is exactly the kind of shift that moves fast, which is why we track it every month on this channel. If you want to actually understand the mechanism behind wealth signaling, instead of just chasing the aesthetic everyone else is copying, subscribe now. We're releasing a full breakdown next week on the family jewelers and ateliers that don't have public storefronts at all, and how old money families get access to them. You will not want to miss that. 1. What old money buys instead. So if the visible logo houses, the diffusion lines, the celebrity collaborations, and even the newly famous quiet luxury darlings are all, to varying degrees, off the list, what's actually left? What does old money purchasing look like in practice? The consistent answer across every family office consultant, heritage tailor, and stylist who works in this world comes down to 4 categories. Bespoke over ready to wear. A garment made to a client's individual measurements by a tailor or atelier the family has often worked with across multiple generations. Carries none of the dateability or mass recognition problems of a branded piece, because it was never designed to be recognized by anyone outside a very small circle. Inherited over purchased. A significant portion of what old money actually wears, jewelry especially, was never bought retail at all. It was inherited, reset, or restored, which sidesteps the entire question of brand signaling, because the value proposition is provenance, not purchase. Unmarked craftsmanship, family jewelers, small leather goods workshops, and regional ateliers that have never pursued national or global retail expansion remain, by structural necessity, exclusive, not because of marketing, but because they've simply never scaled. Function-first materials, fabric weight, hand finishing, and construction quality that only become apparent on close inspection, not from 10 feet away, remain the actual currency of old money style, precisely because they can't be photographed, flipped, or explained in a single Instagram caption. The through line across all 7 sections of this video is the same idea, stated in different ways. Old money's relationship to luxury brands is not about avoiding expense. It's about avoiding legibility to people who haven't already been let in. A logo, a diffusion line, a celebrity collaboration, or even a viral, quiet luxury recommendation all do the same thing. They make a signal readable by a mass audience. And the entire point of old money signaling, as a centuries-old social system, is that it was never designed to be read by a mass audience in the first place. This isn't hidden. It's just never taught. If this broke down something you'd never fully put into words before, that's exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe for the next deep dive, and go watch our episode on the stealth wealth audit. It's the natural next step from everything we just covered. See you in the next one.